Morning, everybody. This is Mike Brennan here at the National Hurricane Center. It's just before 11:30 a.m. Eastern Time on Thursday, September 14th. Here to bring you the latest update on Hurricane Lee, which is has a maximum sustained winds about 90 miles per hour, currently situated about 245 miles west-southwest of Bermuda, moving now more quickly toward the north at about 14 miles an hour. The main story with Lee is just the size of the wind field. We have tropical storm force winds occurring on Bermuda, again, almost 250 miles from the center. The tropical storm force winds actually extend out more than 300 miles away from the center of Lee, and that wind field is going to move up towards New England and Atlantic Canada over the next couple of days and going to bring significant impacts to a large portion of that region. But you can already see the cloud pattern associated with Lee starting to stretch out to the north, and that's indicative of it's going to be moving more quickly toward the north, and we're actually expecting the forward speed to increase here over the next couple of days. But again, here's a depiction of the wind field, the tropical storm force wind shown in orange, extending out almost about 300 miles from the center. The hurricane force winds almost 100 miles from the center. So if you can take this wind field northward, you can see it's going to impact much of New England, especially southeastern Massachusetts, Cape Cod, the islands, down East Maine, portions of New Brunswick and Nova Scotia. That's where we now have a tropical storm warning in effect from Woods Hole, Massachusetts, up to Hull, around Cape Cod, including Martha's Vineyard and Nantucket. So that means in that area, somewhere in that area, we expect tropical storm conditions to occur within the next 36 hours. We still have a tropical storm watch west of Woods Hole over to Watch Hill, Rhode Island, including Block Island, and north of Hull up to Stonington, Maine, with a hurricane watch in effect from Stonington, Maine up to the Canadian border and for portions of New Brunswick and Nova Scotia, where we could see some stronger winds, winds maybe approaching hurricane force, especially in wind gusts, as the center of Lee is expected to move closer to that region of down East Maine and portions of southern Nova Scotia and New Brunswick. But you can see even with the forecast of Lee's center expected to pass quite far offshore of southeastern Massachusetts, the large size of that wind field is going to push those winds into that region. We're most concerned about those impacts in southeastern Massachusetts and in down East Maine. Here's another look at the watches and warnings. You can see the tropical storm warning here for Cape Cod and the islands, tropical storm watches, and then they extend a little farther inland over portions of eastern Maine, including Bangor, and we have the hurricane watch in effect for places like Eastport as well. On the waterfront, again, the large wind field of Lee is going to move a lot of water around. We have a storm surge watch in effect for the bay side of Cape Cod and for Nantucket, where we could see up to 2 to 4 feet of inundation above normally high ground. And that's with that northeasterly wind on the west side of Lee is going to funnel water into Cape Cod Bay over a prolonged period of time. That's where we're expecting to see the highest water levels. But you can see everywhere in blue, all the way from Long Island Sound, all the way up through Maine, we are expecting to see some areas 1 to 3 feet of inundation above ground level, especially if that peak inundation occurs at the time of high tide. It's very sensitive in the northeastern U.S. with large tidal ranges between high and low tide, but the potential for widespread inundation of 1 to 3 feet across much of the New England coast and back into the Long Island Sound region. So that's why we have that storm surge watch in effect for portions of Cape Cod, where we're most concerned about the inundation potential there. If we move on to the rainfall, again, with Lee moving relatively quickly, rainfall amounts are going to be somewhat tempered by that, but we are expecting 1 to 4 inches of rain across portions of eastern New England, especially across eastern Maine and across Cape Cod and the islands. And that could lead to some flash flood concerns. We're most concerned about the area from Caribou down to Bangor over to Eastport, where there's a slight risk of flash flooding as we move through the day on Saturday. So in terms of timing, what we're going to expect to see is tropical storm conditions advancing northward into southeastern New England by late Friday, and then advancing northward along the coast of New England Friday night and into Saturday. I do want to mention again, we've been talking about rip currents all week. The waves from Lee are moving up the east coast. Dangerous surf and rip current conditions all the way from Florida up to New England. Everywhere you see here in red has a high risk of rip currents today. Yellow is moderate risk. So really not a great day to be out in the water anywhere along the U.S. East Coast. If you are at the beach, please stay safe. Follow any advice you're given by your local lifeguards or any warning flags that are flying. We lose a lot of people to surf and rip currents in hurricanes passing well offshore. So we want to keep you safe from that. So just to wrap things up, again, the biggest point of emphasis with Lee is the size of the storm. It almost doesn't matter exactly where the center of Lee moves over the next few days. We're expecting tropical storm conditions across much of the coast of New England up into and potentially hurricane conditions in down East Maine and in Atlantic Canada. So please stay tuned for more information on Lee. Come back to hurricanes.gov for the National Hurricane Center and weather.gov for your local National Weather Service forecast office. And we'll be back with more updates from here at the National Hurricane Center throughout the next few days. I'm Mike Brennan.